what's up, B fam? Today, you are going to hear about a topic that many of you guys have probably been either driving in your car or sitting somewhere in your house, or after you've received that text from that family member and you're thinking, oh my goodness, my family is crazy. Do you ever feel like you are like the only normal one in your family? That is what we're going to get into today. We're going to be talking about dysfunctional families. I shared my story a few episodes back on how I grew up and then how I took some of that dysfunction, and it followed me into my marriage and into how I raised my kids. And then I really had to learn how to break free of that. And in that process, I want to be able to share some really helpful tips with you. So I have us a special guest today, Jamie Bailey from Expedition Marriage. You may have heard one of our episodes we have done with her and Chris in the past, or just recently on episode 186, Chris and Randall had a man's discussion about men leading the home and talking about their book that they wrote, the men's devotional for dads, that just recently came out. And so they had some guy talk, and now we're going to have some girl talk, and we're going to dig into some of this. How do you know if your family is dysfunctional? And then if so, how can we fix it? How can we help? How can we move forward? How do we have relationships with these family members that don't want to change, that they want to stay in that dysfunction? So we have Jamie here today, and she's going to bring us all of her wisdom. They are counselors, they are authors, they are podcast hosts themselves. And so she's going to share with us that with you in just a minute. All right, Jamie. So before we get into all of these questions, because I kind of already hinted around to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, let's just do a brief overview about your blended family dynamics, and then just tell us a little bit about y'all's heart behind Expedition Marriage.
Sure. Well, thank you, Scarlett, for having me today. Yeah, we do have a bit of a different blended family. We're a blended family that feels fully like a natural family. I was a pregnant teenager. I came from a dysfunctional family, so I'm well informed by that by profession and by real life experience. But our blended family here was, me as a pregnant teenager. I left the house really young and ended up getting married at the ripe old age of 19. And unfortunately, it was to an abusive man. I repeated a lot of what I, dealt with growing up, and that marriage was going nowhere fast. And I ended up sending my ex-husband to prison for domestic violence and had to heal from all of that. But I had, with me, I was 3 weeks out of my marriage and just separated from my marriage. I had just left my husband, and it was for my daughter. My daughter Alicia was about 1.5 at the time. And those 3 weeks is when I met Chris, who I'm married to today. And we met in a karaoke bar. Neither of us knew the Lord. So we weren't, heading in the best of directions in our lives, and met him. And that's when everything changed. And so we ended up getting married a couple years later. We moved in. We did everything wrong in our relationship. We met within 5 months. We moved in together and all of that. And that's when our family blended. And eventually, when our daughter Alicia was about 4, is when, and soon after we got married, is when Chris had adopted her legally. And she doesn't know her biological father. He passed away at 38, and he was never in her life. He willingly signed over rights to him. And so Alicia has never known anybody as her father other than, Chris. And so to her and to him, they're that, natural mother or natural father-daughter relationship. But he did step in initially as that step parent.
Yeah, when I first heard y'all's story, because I think I remember, having no idea. I was just following y'all because you're a marriage help, on Instagram is where I follow. So I wasn't listening to the podcast yet. So I heard one of y'all's episodes and you had shared that story. And I was like, Oh my goodness. Just to hear just the hope. That's what I hear. When I hear your story,
Mm.
I feel that hope because there are so many people out there that are walking through that life right now and in the middle of it. And I'm sure you can remember back in the day, it feels like this will never end. There's no way out. It
Mhm.
does feel so hopeless. And so to see, even when you come out of that and you step into something and you still don't get it right, kind of like you talked about with y'all getting
Yeah.
together, moving in together and stuff first, that God still takes all of that and makes something so beautiful out of it. And now your kids, how old are they? I know they're grown.
Yeah, Alicia is 32, 27, and 26.
So definitely y'all have made it through, survived it through, and come out the other side. And then now y'all spend your time on social media and on podcasts and the different platforms helping other married couples. So where did that really start from and spark like, hey, we should do this uh in the whole, like, for everybody out there to see?
Yeah, well, what happened is we originally had a private practice, and we would see individuals, some marriages, and basically, if you needed help in the mental health arena, you called us, we were going to get you in and help you. But what happened is we began to see and recognize everybody that was sitting before us, every individual that came in with whatever problem they were dealing with, they all came from broken homes. They came from broken families. And so they came from dysfunctional families. And to a point, and there was a time when I worked in the school system as a counselor, and there was not one healthy family that a child I was seeing was coming from. You know, there's always dysfunction and issues in the family. And we began to realize we have got to get ahead of this because we're just putting out these fires left and right, and we're never able to go back and see where the root of it, where they're getting lit at. And so that's when we decided we need a wider net. We need to go directly towards marriages, because by default all those individuals we were, helping, we can still help them in a preventative form by helping marriages. And that's what we did. And so we flipped that. And that's where Expedition Marriage was created. We casted a wider net on social media and started building a podcast and all other things, and just reach as many people as we can with that hope that you're talking about, because no situation is too dire that God can't redeem it. And so that's kind of where our heart is, because we are huge believers in hope, and we are huge believers in the marriage journey should be enjoyed. We align on that topic. This should be fun. This should be joy filled. Yes, you're going to have issues along the way, but the way it's designed is supposed to be connecting and refining and fun, and just it's supposed to be healthy and good. And that's really what we're trying to do here in this small way.
Yeah, and y'all do such a great job at it. The information that y'all share out there and just the fun part, that's what drew us to y'all, is
Mhm.
that it is supposed to be fun. You fall in love with your spouse for a reason, and then for some reason people get completely okay with just becoming these like roommate type
Mm.
marriages, and it's like, no, 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 let's let's have
Yes.
our best life and let's live it together.
Mhm.
Let's enjoy each other's company and remind ourselves why we are together. So I love what y'all are doing. And that's what sparked this conversation today, because I was watching one of your reels and that was what it said. It said something about like, how do you know if you're in a dysfunctional
Mhm.
family? And I was like, yeah, how do you know? Because one thing that I have seen true, some people will label things dysfunctional, and that's really just normal. Like,
Mhm.
we in our
Mhm.
head, especially as Christians, I think we think, okay, if you're a Christian, this is what Christian life should look like, and it should be perfect. Nobody makes any mistakes. And if anybody steps outside of this perfect box, then you're dysfunctional, or you're falling outside
Mhm.
of like God's best plan for you. And God does have a good design. Like, here's his path he wants us to follow,
Mhm.
but he knows that we're not always going to get it right. And if you read the Bible, it is filled, every single person besides Jesus is messing up, taking matters into their own hands,
Mhm.
doing all these things that are not God's best design. And yet He is looking for the people that have a heart towards him. And so I see like there are people that think, okay, I'm trying to be perfect mom, I'm trying to be perfect wife, I'm trying to raise these perfect kids. And they're like, if it's not happening what I envisioned, then it's dysfunctional. And that's not the case. But then there's some people living inside what they think is completely normal. And they have not realized, no, babe, that's not normal. Like,
Yes.
that's dysfunction. That should not be taking place. And they don't know any better because they've never experienced anything. So, what would you say? Like, if someone listening right now and they're like, well, I don't know, which one am I? How can you identify if you are in a dysfunctional family or dysfunctional situation?
Well, dysfunction as a whole is going to be a family that has lots of conflict, lots of misbehavior, even abuse. But the key word, aside from the abuse, we all know that that is any kind of abuse is dysfunctional. But when you have, not good communication going on and you have some misbehaviors, the key word that kind of lends towards or bends towards dysfunction is when it's repeated, when it becomes chronic. So the occasional, oh, I lost my temper, I yelled, I did this, or I'm having this hard time here. That's not necessarily dysfunctional. That's often normal because we are humans, and so we had a lapse of judgment or something like that, or we're just hitting a hard time. But when it's repeated and chronic, that usually is when it's more dysfunctional. And so if you're in a family where there's not good communication, where we either yell or, we don't talk about anything at all. And those families where it's like, you're not allowed to say that, and everything's swept under the rug. Or if there's no boundaries at all. And lots of times in dysfunction, there's usually one person, like one parent, who everybody caters to. Everybody's walking on eggshells. It's like, you can't say this because mom will get upset. Don't do that. And everybody's placating this one particular person. Addiction is a big sign of dysfunction. There's no addiction in healthy families. Addiction does not breed healthy habits. Criticism, lots of judgment and critical behaviors. And lots of times there's spiritual abuse. There's families where, let's just say a father, is saying, if you don't do, the Bible says this, if there's biblical manipulation is, you're going to hell if you don't obey, and things like that. And, honestly, untreated mental illness, that can be a dysfunctional thing. And that's one of the ones where there's grace and understanding for that, because living with someone with bipolar or something like that, that's always going to carry a nature, like a rhythm of dysfunction with it. And that's dysfunction you learn how to manage and work with. But it also, if you don't, it can become highly dysfunctional. And same goes for neglect. If you are a child who didn't have your basic needs met, didn't have your emotional needs met, that's dysfunction. If you are married and you have a spouse who is not willing to change, who's not willing to do anything different, my way or the highway, I'm not meeting your needs at all, and I'm not ever going to change, that's dysfunctional. So there are lots of things, but really the key word is, how long is this going on? Is this a pattern? When it becomes a pattern, you're really in the dysfunctional territory at that point.
Yeah, I experienced in my upbringing with how dysfunctional it was. I mean, pretty much all the things that you were saying was either my parents or me. So it's like I came from where it was the abuse, the mental. I was never abused. I was very fortunate in that, like being the only girl, my two brothers. But when it got violent, it was mostly between my parents, and we witnessed it. And then also it got taken out on my older brother, usually. But seeing that alcohol abuse, drug abuse, all of those things, so that I saw that growing up, and I said, that will not be my home. But I did not have the right tools. And so I overcorrected. And so then I
Yes.
took in some of those where you're like, and I didn't do it on purpose. It's lack of knowledge, but where it could be some of that Bible manipulation or, shoving that, this is what we expect here in this house. If you don't do these things, then you're
Mhm.
going against, what the Bible says. And not in a sense, I know there's very extreme cases out there, and we
Mhm.
were doing it with complete love in our
Right.
parenting. But I was doing it out of fear as well, because I was afraid that if my kids did any of these things, then they were going to go back and revert to what I'm working so hard to change
Mhm.
for our family. I want to break these generational things off. And so I'm trying to walk this very straight and narrow line, and I'm trying to bring my kids along with me. And they didn't always get it right. And it would upset me to the point where I just couldn't handle it, because I didn't have the right tools in my tool bag there. So I want us, before today is over, I want you to share some of those things with us. But I do want to talk a little bit before we shift gears into that, is if someone doesn't get help and doesn't take the
Mhm.
necessary steps, they're like, yes, this is my family. Yes, I came from dysfunction. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's me. I overcorrected, or I just fell into following the same patterns. If they don't get the help, how does that affect their marriage now and their family now?
Ooh, well, you brought up a good point in just sharing what you did, because usually when you come from dysfunction, there's about three things people will do. One, what you did is a kind of rebellion. They will rebel and they will go, meaning I'm going far against what I was raised in. I'm rebelling against that. I'm taking a stand against that. And then you overcorrect. And there's lots of anxiety in that, because you're just waiting, because the shoe falling just a little bit is very stressful. And so they will rebel and overcorrect, or they will repeat and they will end up looking just like the family they came from. I did a little bit of that because, like you talked about in the beginning, we have that sense of normalizing this dysfunction because it's all we know. We don't know a healthy family because we weren't raised in one. And so many times, this is very common, people will get out of that dysfunction and go right back into another dysfunctional relationship, or you will become somebody who caves to it, and you become more of that people pleaser, and that, what, I will give in to the dysfunction, and I will coddle it. I don't want to rock the boat. I'm not going to rebel against it. I'm too scared to do that. I know it's not normal, but I just don't want to mess things up and potentially make it worse. And so that's what will happen. And when you bring that into marriage, if you have not addressed the dysfunction before you get married, which most of us don't, in fact, most of us don't know we came from dysfunction until we get married, and we see these problems, because what happens is, while you're being raised in that dysfunction, you're creating a whole bunch of what are called implicit memories. You have no idea you're creating these things. And that's, if you smell something and you're like, oh, that smells like this reminds me of this place, or you hear a song and you're like, oh, I remember when I was 15 years old, and a memory's attached to it. You didn't sit there studying this lyric so you could, be 40 one day and have these memories. You're just collecting these along the way, and you don't know they're from, they're more experiential, they're more feelings based, and these are the things that feed our triggers. And
Mm.
so oftentimes all those implicit memories that we have, ones that are negative, because the smells, that's a great one. You can get right on your bike and you didn't think about how I'm riding. It's just implicit. You just do that. But things we don't realize are, what? I came from a lot of yelling. And then I had a little bit of time where it was removed. And now I'm in my marriage and my husband's mad about something, maybe not even to do with me. And I hear him yelling, and boom, that trigger is now activated, and you are, catapult right back to where you were when that happened. And so you end up with all these triggers in your marriage. And what happens is, like I was saying, with the raised voice, now you're going to react just like you did then, which might be whatever you needed to do to protect yourself. Maybe, what, I'm going to go in my room and I'm going to avoid. Or it might be, if you're more like me, I'm going to run at it. Why are you so mad? What's going on with you? And, and then I might have a husband who's like, I'm yelling at the football game. and it's just been triggered. And so you have all these triggers, or if my spouse seems a little grumpy, some people might be, oh, they're mad at me. They're instantly mad at me. And so you're ending up creating these unnecessary problems that aren't even there in your marriage because of all these past memories and the meanings you've assigned to them. And so when you're in your marriage, you end up assigning all kinds of meanings to your spouse's behavior. And without even stopping to pause and clarify, hey, are you mad at me? Or what is wrong? We make all these assumptions and we respond much bigger because those implicit memories and dysfunction, man, we suffered those a long time. They are rooted deep. And so when they get triggered, all of that comes out, that all that history. And so we're reacting to this massive amount of pain and history, and we're not reacting to my husband's just yelling at a football game. And so it gets really exaggerated and out of balance. And so in marriage, that's usually, marriage activates these triggers. And that's what it is. But that's the hard part, but that's also the beautiful part, because we have power of what we do with those. And in a way, that's the Lord allowing them to be exposed, not so we can continue to suffer, but so we can heal. Because your marriage is the most, next to your relationship with the Lord, it is the most refining relationship you're going to be in. And that refinement, it's scary. It requires vulnerability. It requires a massive amount of humility, which I'm not a fan of. I know it does so much good, but man, getting on that humility, because I grew up very defensive and protecting myself and being accused of being, I was the family scapegoat. And so now if anything's my fault, it's hard for me to accept that because I was always blamed. And so we all have these different things, but marriage is, man, it's so good about pointing out our flaws and pointing out the areas where we need to be healed. And there's purpose in that. There's pain in it, but it's purposeful pain when we manage them the right way.
Yeah, I have seen that over and over again, especially in my own marriage, but others as well, is when you can learn to work through that conflict in a healthy way, beautiful things come out of it. The intimacy that grows in your marriage comes out of it. And Randall and I did it wrong for so long. And just listening to you talk, I was like, yeah, that's one of mine. Yeah, that's one of mine. There needs to be, because Randall and I, neither one of us are cussers. And that's because I grew up in a house that they cussed all the time. And when my mom was upset and she started cussing, it scared me, because that meant, something was fixing to unleash after that. And so if Randall is at the house and he says, we have a cat, and the cat pissed on the floor, that word makes me scared. I think he is angry. And it took a long time for me to learn to talk with him about that. And I would just think that he was just done fixing to get rid of our cat, kick it out the door, like, game over. And then I finally started expressing to him, like, when you cuss, it puts me in a fearful mode. And he's like, oh, like, I didn't even know. He does it so seldom that he didn't realize when he pulls out one of those words that it was affecting me that way. If he's in the car and he gets a little fancy,
road ragey.
Yes, I can't. I'm like, I'll be looking out the window with tears, and he's like, "Are you crying?"
Yes, yeah.
From my
That's how that works. Yeah, the dysfunction, those triggers, they don't allow you don't really have a good grasp on what's really happening, but you think that you do. And so most people aren't aware of them. Like you said, you carried them for years. I did the same thing because to me, it makes total sense. I'm not even questioning. Of course, I'd be mad at you for using that word. Of course, I'd be scared of that, but and that's the biggest thing is we're not aware of what's happening. We're just reacting to it. And Chris had shared a story with me a little while ago, because sometimes these things, they don't always happen, in that way, but they can be silly things. you know how in our with their bathroom counters, like, let's be real, we have the majority of it. We have the drawers, we have all the things. Well, Chris has a drawer in our bathroom, and we'd go to the dentist and we'd get the free little bags or the little tubes of toothpaste, and I kept them in a gallon Ziploc bag. Well, it was kind of full at this point, and I put the bag in his drawer. Well, I had no idea, and he came out and had to tell me later, much later, he pulled that bag out and got so mad. And he's like, if you would have been with me, I would have said something really mean. I would have been angry over that. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? It's two things. Well, he's the youngest of five. He
Mm,
never got his space. He lost out on everything. And why that wasn't dysfunctional, it was a pain point for him, and it was me. And so it replicated that. He knows I'm not trying to kick him out of the bathroom and not give him a space and treat him like the youngest or inferior at all. But that's what that memory told him. And that's what happens, and that's where we're not even aware of that happening. But the longer you get married, or the longer you're married, you do start to learn some of those. And certainly when you become intentional about it, man, that's where everything can change, because now you start dealing with what is happening instead of dealing what feels like what's happening. And there's a big difference between the two quite often.
yeah, yeah. So how can we, without professional help? Like for me, I ended
Mhm.
up seeing a therapist and she validated some things. She told me where I was just completely off. Like, you're wrong
Mhm.
there. And I was like, oh, that was me. And then I really just spent a lot of time in my quiet time with the Lord and asking him, like, what is this? I would feel that feeling, and then I would say, why God? Why God? Why God? Until he
Mhm.
revealed to me the why. Do you feel like for the majority of people, like they're listening today and they're like, oh yeah, those things are triggering me. It's making this memory come up. Is that something that they can identify themselves and
Mhm.
work through a process themselves? Or is it like, okay, no, you need professional help? And how do you know the difference?
It depends on how much it's disrupting your life. And that's the thing, for me, I was with you, like, I got professional help for it, because for me a lot of it morphed into really bad anxiety. I was just on edge all the time, and so I got help for that. And so when it's something that is interrupting your daily life, it's definitely time to get some professional help, for that. And what's hard, like, today's day and age, we're living in a life where if we have a trigger, it's your fault, it's your responsibility to fix that. And that's what we do in marriage too. It's like, I'm triggered, so I need you to stop saying that word. I need you to stop doing those things. And we don't ever think, well, you know what? No, I need to learn how to not be triggered by that. And I need to learn how to take that trigger and do something healthy with it. But instead, our, automatic response is stop triggering me. Stop doing that. If you would stop doing that, then I would be fine. I mean, it's a statement we hear over and over in the counseling office. If she would just stop pushing my buttons, if he would and it's like, it doesn't work that way. We get to determine whether or not we turn that button on or off. And so with our triggers, yes, if they're not, chronically affecting your daily life. Yeah, and I think what you said was great, and what you did is the first step is recognizing when that trigger has happened. When it's like, oh, I feel unsafe here. I feel, and I don't mean like unsafe. I mean like, oh, I feel vulnerable. I feel vulnerable here. I instantly got mad at that. I'm scared about that. That made me sad. It makes me want to run away. I want to escape. When those moments come up, that's when we need to recognize, instead of reacting, we can hit that pause and go, okay, something just happened here. Let me step out of it and go, okay, Lord, what was that? What is that? And start taking those triggers, instead of as, red flags or big warnings, but they're yellow lights. They're yellow lights. It's, I've got to pause here. Something happened. What am I really thinking? And then you begin to question and clarify things, whether that's with, Randall saying that word, and you're able to go, gosh, I really don't like when you say things like that, or you're not going to throw the cat out the door, right? No, babe, I'm just frustrated. That's it. So many times, Chris and I have had that dynamic because he's more of a pleaser. And if I get upset, he's instantly Mr. Fix It. What do I need to do? What and all that works great in the beginning, not a good long-term plan. But now it's his question is, are you mad at me or are you just mad? I'm like, no, I'm not mad at you at all. I'm just, this thing is frustrating me. And
Mhm.
so you learn how to clarify, you learn how to pause, identify that you've been triggered, and then ask it questions. Hit that pause button and go, okay, what is it? I'm not going to respond until I know what I'm responding to. I'm going to find out like that you're okay with us, right? Like you're not mad at me, what's going on here, and then give your spouse the opportunity. And the more you do that, the more you're creating positive memories. The more you're going, okay, it just because this happened growing up, just because my dad would rage and do that, or just because my dad turned into an alcoholic, it doesn't mean my husband who had a beer, maybe watching a football game, is going to, be one. And so we question things instead of automatically reacting to them. And you develop that pattern. And absolutely, you can get through this on your own. And better yet, getting your spouse on board can help it go even faster. But that in itself can be a challenge, because if you're somebody who came from dysfunction and married right into dysfunction, you may not be married to the healthiest of people. And so it might require some professional help, or it might require, you doing more of your due diligence on the work and being more intentional, knowing they may not get on board at first.
Yeah, man, it's so empowering though, and I love your answer because it comes from us, right? Like we do have the ability, like you said, in today's age especially, like we're triggered, you need to change something, you need to fix
Mhm.
something. For someone like me, because I came from feeling like I had no control. So in my parenting and adult life, I wanted all of the control. And
Mhm.
although it is unhealthy and God had to show me that and I had to learn to release control in this one area, it is very beneficial because if you like to have that control, you get to choose. You get to choose how you're
Mhm.
going to react to this. And once you begin to notice and recognize it, like you're saying, those things don't bother me anymore. I'm not offended by everything and anything that my kids say or that Randall says or does. Like when they have something that used to bother me or trigger me, now it's like,
Mhm.
because it's not a
Yeah.
button that gets pushed anymore because I figured out how to create those memories, like you're talking about, the more
Mhm.
good, and seeing that there's not going to be a whole war that starts because
Mhm.
of this one little instance that takes place. And then that brings comfort. And something else you had said, and
Mhm.
it reminded me because I'm more like Chris, where I want to fix the problem. So Randall has got to the point now when we talk, he'll start venting, and I go into panic mode like, how can I make his life better? I want to make it better. So do
Mhm.
we need to do this? Do we need to do this? I mean, I'm selling the house and having us move, like I'm very extreme. And so he will tell me now, I just need to be able to vent for a minute. I don't need you to
Mhm.
solve this problem for me. And I'm like, okay, give it to me. Like,
Yes.
so
Yeah, because when you know what you're dealing with, now you can be a resource for one another. And that's like such a great thing. And we will have that dynamic as well. And it's like, okay, so what do you need from me right now? I don't need you to fix it because I'm like Randall. Like I'm mad about this, or I'm frustrated. I want to vent, and I don't need you to go in to fix it. I just need you to listen, or I don't need you to do anything. I'm just venting. That's it. But like you were saying, the most powerless thing you can do is just give up your power. Every time you're blaming somebody, you are handing them your power. You are saying, I'm blaming you, which means I am powerless to change without your permission. That is not what we want to do. And what's sad and unfortunate is when we do that, we really believe it. We believe I'm not ever going to be okay unless you stop doing this particular thing. We're giving up all of our power. And I don't think most people realize when we play that blame game, when we want somebody else to be responsible for our emotions and our decisions, there's no power in that. And now we've just created more anxiety in our life because we've given our power away and we have zero control at all. And we're at the mercy of our spouse, of our kids, of the guy on the road, whoever it is. And that's just not the way we want to live.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that right there is going to be able to change family dynamics, especially when you are
Mhm.
in a blended family. There is so much out of your control, and you do feel like you're giving over this
Mhm.
power and this control to everybody else getting to make these decisions, whether you're the bio mom and you're having to send your kids off into a place that you're not 100% is okay for them, or you're a step parent and your house feels like you're an outsider in it when your stepchildren come over to visit and you feel powerless in that situation. So I think for those that are listening today, that they heard what you just said and let that really sink in and just marinate on it and figure out, because it's not like now you take your authority and you're like, I'm just picturing someone with a sword going, I've got the power, and let me show
Yes.
y'all that I've got the power
Mhm.
here. It's not something that has to be this big, grand, put everybody in their place. It's something that
Mhm.
happens within you. Now, I want, before we end today, I want to shift gears a little bit, because there are people in our lives, though, these dysfunctional family members that don't want to change. They're
Mhm.
not the people listening today and saying, "Thank you, Jamie, for that information," because they're able to take that and see, to see what you're saying and
Mhm.
internalize it and say, "Okay, I want change." There's so many that are working through this in their life, but then they have, maybe it's their mom or their mother-in-law or
Mhm.
grandparent or the ex-spouse that's constantly, that is in their life, but they don't know how to put some sort of healthy boundary up, instead of
Mhm.
just building up walls. Because I've been bad about that. Like, okay, you don't make good choices, you're out. Like, and it
Mhm.
might be a week, it might be 3 years that I'm not going to speak to you because I don't know how
Mhm.
to handle you and keep my peace. So I'm just not going to deal with you ever. And I know that's not right either. So, what can
Mhm.
we do for these family members that are unwilling to get help?
Yeah, well, with that, you have to get good at creating boundaries. You have to get good. And, you mentioned about being in a step family. That's an area, if you're in a step family, you have lots of practice. You're going to have lots of opportunity to practice because you're dealing with an extended family. If it's just a marriage, and maybe you've had your own bio kids together, they're not entering in your family with triggers. Step kids are. Why? Because they've gone through a divorce. Yes, some ages are harder and easier than others, but you're dealing with an entire family filled with likely triggers, and you're all going to be feeding off of one another. And so learning how to go, you know what? I'm not going to respond to you when you talk like that. We can talk about this a little bit later. You have all these opportunities for different types of boundary setting in your home. And so practicing in your own home with safer people
Mhm.
is a little bit easier to do, and it's beneficial to your kids. Teaching your kids how to not give their own power away. Man, I wish I had that life skill when I was 10, or whatever it was, but with outsiders, you have to determine, and here's the good thing about, kind of toxic people or people who are dysfunctional, is they're usually very predictable. They'll do the same things, just like you said. Well, when I know my mom raised her voice, when she was cussing, when this happened, I knew what was around the corner. And so you kind of learn, they tend to have the same habits, the same bad habits. And so you learn what those are, and you have to decide. And setting a boundary is deciding what's okay with me and what is not. And you have to evaluate that first. You know what? What's not okay is how my mother in law speaks to me, is how my mom yells at me, how my mom criticizes my parenting all the time. What's not okay is every time we go to dad's house, he's always drinking, whatever it is. And then you go, okay, now I need to develop a plan. Ideally, you do this together with your spouse. And if it's a parent situation, whoever's parent it is, that's the lead on the boundary. You can decide it together, but they need to take the lead on the boundary. And so it becomes, you know what, Dad, if you've been drinking, we're going to go ahead and go. And you know that in advance. You know what? When Dad starts getting tipsy, we're going to leave. When Mom starts speaking to me like that, it's going to be time. And you develop the plan outside of the situation. When Mom yells at me like that, I'll ask her one time, Mom, can you please stop yelling at me? I want to listen to you, but not if you're going to yell at me. And then if she starts up again, then it's the warning number 2. Mom, if you don't quit yelling at me, Randall and I are going to have to leave. You know, or this conversation, we're going to tap out of this conversation. And that you're giving, boundaries are giving the other person, it's not controlling them, it's giving them a choice and going, do you want to be in a healthy relationship with me or do you not? They get to choose that for themselves. Boundaries can feel very mean, but they're not. That person, it's beneficial information they need to have. You want them to know how to best be in relationship with you. That's all a boundary is telling them to do. If you keep yelling at me, I'm going to get off the phone. I appreciate your input on my parenting, but that actually kind of hurts my feelings, or it's making me feel like you think I'm an inferior mom, you know, or a dad, whatever it is. And you give them the chance to respond. And then you tell them what I need. I need you to stop speaking to me like this. I need you to stop drinking when we come over. I need you to stop doing this around the kids, whatever the situation is. And then it becomes, if they disrespect that, well, now here's what's going to happen if you continue doing that. And then if they disrespect that, then you better make sure you do what you said you were going to do. If you say we're going to pack up and leave, if you keep doing this, you indeed need to pack up and leave. After a couple of times of doing that, most people will get on board and go, well, I can't do that with Scarlett because she'll just leave. That's right, I will. And they'll usually say it sarcastically. And well, I can't, oh yeah, I'm not allowed to talk. Nope, you're not. You know, and you let them poke the bear a little. I'm not fazed by that. I set my boundary, I'm owning it. And you move forward with that. Now, if they are proving to completely disrespect, if Dad doesn't just drink on occasion and get drunk then, but if he's a full-blown alcoholic, Dad, we can't be in relationship like this. Not until, I can't have you around my children. I can't have that happening until you get healthy. If you go to rehab, if you stop drinking, whatever it is, then we can restore that. If Mom, you know, if somebody is narcissistic and abusive and they will not change their behavior, then it is time to go, I love you, but I'm going to love you from afar. And when you decide to make these changes in your life, I will be right here waiting. And that's it. You didn't end the relationship. They did by their unwillingness to quit being toxic. So it's not on you. You didn't do it. You gave them the choice and they made it. And that's what you do. So not all relationships can be restored, but you've got to know what you're looking for, know what's not okay with you, and then have a plan of action as far as when they do this thing, I'm going to tell them to please stop or ask them to please stop. Then I'm going to tell them what I'm going to do if they don't stop, and then I'm going to do it. And when you do that, people begin to start taking you seriously. But if you don't value your own self, nobody else is going to value you either. And so we really have to know what we want and be willing to enforce it.
Man, so much wisdom. I'm gonna have to like save this episode specifically for myself ever so often and go back. And you know, I've done a lot of growth over the years in a lot of areas. Boundaries is one that I'm just now starting. And it's just like you said, I do have some people in my life that as I've put in these boundaries, that like, oh, you got your boundaries, you know, like so sarcastic, you know, like, oh,
yes, I do.
yes. But then
Yeah.
following through, and I think that's the hard part, because if not, you're conditioning just like a toddler is conditioned. Okay, if I cry loud enough or long enough, eventually they're going to give me what I want. And so if you're putting in these boundaries and then you're like giving that warning, well, if you don't stop, I'm going to have to leave. I'm backing up out the door now. I'm serious.
Yes.
It's on the door. And because you want them to change. You don't want to have to stick with it. But if you don't follow through with what you say, then they learn that they can just get away with it. So, man, I know, like I said earlier, I think this episode is just going to be so freeing for so many
Mm.
people in their family, and give you that power, like Jamie is talking about, that you are getting, keeping your power, and you're learning how to not give it away to everyone else. And to me, that just gives me so much hope in my family, because it's like nothing can really phase me when I get that.
Mhm.
And sometimes that can get me too much, like, oh, nothing can phase me, and then something happens and I'm like, oh man, I don't know how to deal with this one. But really, it's just something new, like you said earlier. These new things come up, and it's not a big huge red warning light anymore like it used to be, but it is
Mhm.
this yellow light that's like, hey, something's wrong. Our body was created to give us these warning signs. If you're one that says, oh, I'm feeling anxious, well, that's a warning sign that something's happening. Like, let's ask questions and get to the root of, like, what is this feeling that's happening. You get mine, I get sick to my stomach. Like when something's
Mm.
not okay, all of a sudden, like, oh, my stomach hurts. And I used to think I was actually sick to my stomach. And my grandma would eventually, as that pattern consisted, my grandma would tell me, like, are you really sick, or are you nervous about
Mm.
something? And it usually came down to I was nervous about something that was fixing to take place. But listen to your body, and then begin to ask
Mhm.
these questions. And then, depending on where you're at, take this episode. You might have to listen to it several times, because you may be here today, and then it may be something else in a week or a month from now. And you're like, oh, wait, I have tools for that now. Let me go back and listen to it. So, do you have anything else, Jamie, before we wrap this episode up?
I would just encourage anybody listening with that hope is possible. I mean, there is always hope. We can relearn things. You can heal. I mean, God has designed our bodies and our brains in such a way that they can always heal, they can always grow, and they can always transform. And so, no matter what your situation is, you are not too far gone. You're not too far gone. Even if you take these one step at a time, that's still forward movement, and you can get out of this. You can break dysfunctional family cycles, and you can heal, and you can not be so triggered all the time. It may take a little bit of work, but it's going to be worth it. It's work that actually is beneficial.
Yes, and do the work now. So, like Jamie
Mhm.
and Chris here, they're what, 30? How long y'all been married now?
29 years.
29, so that you're 29 years removed from the dysfunction, instead of prolonging it and prolonging it and prolonging it, thinking and hoping things are going to get better. Go ahead and invest
Mhm.
in that time now, so that you can be looking back at your family and say, wow, look how far we have come. And I love that you said there, you're not too far gone. There's no
Mhm.
marriage or relationship, especially when you are a believer and you have Jesus as that third person in your
Mhm.
relationship. Anything is possible with God. So, and we truly believe that. So, where can our BFAM find you? I've kind of said a couple of them, but let them know if someone's
Mhm.
like, oh, I need more of Jamie and Chris. Where can they find you?
All right. Well, our website has all of our links on it, and that's expeditionmarriage.org. But we also have the Expedition Marriage podcast. We have a lot of fun over on Instagram at expedition_marriage, and we're on YouTube. So those are our primary locations.
Yes, and y'all have a new book that came out.
Yes, we do.
Yes, and they can get this on Amazon, right? That's where we got it, and probably y'all's website as well.
Yes. You can find it all on our website, or Amazon is great.
Awesome, awesome. All right, B fam. So I know you've got so much new tools in your tool belt, some wisdom to move forward, a little bit of homework, even maybe. But let that
Mm.
be that warning sign. Like I started this episode earlier, and there's a reason that I said it. You might be driving in your car right now listening. You may be standing at your sink washing dishes, or maybe crying in your closet when these moments take place. And it's this trigger, this feeling that comes up inside of you, and you used to look at it as a negative thing. You used to look like everyone else was affecting your peace and able to steal that from you. But now you know that is a warning for you to say, okay, what's happening here? Begin to question. If you don't know what it is, ask God. God, what is happening? Why do I feel this way? When we seek him and we ask for his wisdom, he reveals those things to you. Maybe not even in that moment, that instant, but he will reveal that to you. And when he does, now you have some ways to move forward in that. So I hope you walk away with today's episode with so much more hope for your step family than before you listen to this. We love you guys. And until next time, remember to enjoy your blended family. Bye, guys. Hey. Have you heard of Get Out Pass? I hadn't either. I saw it on a friend's social media and I had to immediately look to see if my state had it because she lives in a different state than me. I was like, oh heck yeah, where can we sign up? If you are home for the summer and looking for things to do, you want to get yourself a Get Out Pass. You pay one time for each of your family members, a one-time fee, and it gets you in to all of these places around your community for free. It is so worth it. When I heard about this, I began to look into it and I was like, are you kidding me? It costs this much to get into every single one of these places. This is thousands of dollars that we are saving, and now we have the opportunity because of the one time that we paid to get into all of these places. These are water parks, climbing places, jumping places, arts and craft areas, boardwalks, theme parks, type activities. Then I took that list and I sent it to all of my kids and asked them, hey, which one of these things do you want to do? Now I have plans all summer long, even with my adultish children. And of course the grandbaby. These bigger cities are partnered with Get Out Passes. So go and check now. See if you have a city nearby that allows you to use this pass and then get it for your family. It will pay for itself in 1 to 2 visits. I promise you. And if you're part of our blended family community, use the code BFAM and you get 30% off. You buy it one time and you have all year to go to all of these places one time. Go get it, sign your family up, and do not sit at home this summer with all them kids. Get out the house and make some memories. Thanks for joining us today. We hope this episode has been a blessing and encouraged your family journey.
Make sure you stay connected with us and join our weekly Blended Family newsletter. We send an email out every Friday morning full of support and encouragement.
And when you join, we also want to give you a free gift. So go get yours today. The link is in the show notes below.
Have an amazing day. Remember to enjoy the journey with your blended family, and we'll see you on the next episode.